Hey everyone, Bruce Eckfeldt here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications so we can let you know when the next video is posted. You can also check us out at eckfeldt.com for more great content. With that, let's go check out the video.
You're listening to Thinking Outside the Bud, where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, thought leaders, researchers, advocates, and policymakers who are finding new and exciting ways for cannabis to positively impact business, society, and culture. And now, here is your host, business coach, Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome, everyone. This is Thinking Outside the Bud. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Today, we are speaking with Monica Jones. Monica, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, and Monica, just give our audience a little bit of background on Monica. So, originally, SVA, School of Visual Arts here in New York, BFA, and went from there and got into branding, helped build her studio, 3D Studios, which has been around for a while. Do I say how long it's been around for?
You can.
1997. So you've been doing this for a while. So I'm excited to kind of hear your perspective on branding, and given this kind of space of the cannabis market and where it's going and where it's growing. So let's get into some questions. Thanks again for being on the show. And why don't we start? I always like to start with just kind of personal backgrounds. So tell me a little bit about the work you've done in branding, and then how did you get into the cannabis space?
So, as you know, we've been doing branding for quite a while. After graduating from college, I knew that it was something that I wanted to sort of get into. And we fell into it in a sense because I came out of college and we were focusing on very specific niches within an industry. But as we grew and as our clients became more and more reliant upon our services, they would say, "Oh, well, Monica, can you guys add this? Can you help us do this?" And we'd go, "Well, we don't really do that." "Yeah, no, I know, we know, but can you take care of it for us?" And of course, once you put the system in place for one client, then the system's in place for all clients. And so over the years, what started off as a very sort of simple graphic design ended up being a full service branding and marketing firm where we offer everything from photography to videography to social media marketing. And it's a gamut, event management and promotion. So that's kind of the history of how 3D got started. But branding is a subset of 3D. And basically, myself, I am a huge cannabis advocate because I believe in the product. I believe in it as a vehicle to change lots of lives in a very natural and fantastic way that up until now has not really been embraced in the way that it should have been. And the ability to get into that space and really work in a medium and in an industry that I truly believe in was very, very interesting to me. On top of that, it's an emerging market. And in my lifetime, I've never gotten to be a part of that either. So there are challenges, of course, because cannabis is extremely volatile at the moment, given all of the different problems in place. But I really, really was attracted to the ability to come in, really help businesses that are getting into this market find their footing, finding their way, because there are definitely a lot of challenges in the process. That's an understatement. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of how we came to be in the cannabis space.
Yeah, and I think that story resonates. I mean, I think that many of the people I speak to that have gotten into the cannabis market on the business side, it really is kind of a combination of some kind of personal connection, personal passion, seeing it as an agent of change, seeing it as something that can provide a lot of good for various people for various reasons.
Right.
And unfortunately has been put kind of politically and legally in a situation that thankfully now is changing. But there's a personal passion, but then there's also this business opportunity where people see there's a lot of hype around the market. There's a lot of real growth around the market, a lot of money being, put in various facets of the cannabis industry. So I think I've met a lot of people, and it's fascinating to see this kind of movement around it. Talking a little bit about the companies that you work with, that you talk to, that are getting into the market, looking at this question of branding, looking at the question of marketing, what are some of the common challenges or some of the initial obstacles that they face when you start to speak with them?
Well, it depends on what they're actually looking to do. That does vary depending on the actual business model. But in general, a lot of the problems are similar problems that you would have outside the cannabis industry, funding and things of that nature. And then there's the issue of not really knowing what you're doing. You've decided that this is something that you want to do and you want to jump in full, both feet, but it's complicated. And so a lot of what we end up doing is sort of consulting. It's a lot of consulting that when we work with a lot of these newer companies and businesses and organizations to help them figure out where they need to be. And of course, because of the legal restrictions and all of the various problems, depending on where you're located, it's just, it's choppy waters. Absolutely. So we really try to help to educate, and we gear it so that people understand depending on what they need. So it's really so much of a piece by piece by piece, depending on what people are looking to do. But the basics definitely are there. So, you've got the problems with funding. You've got the problems with management. How do you start? How do you create your space? Where are you focusing your energies? How are you presenting yourself? And how are you making all of that happen? I mean, these are all very, very important questions that you kind of need to answer almost before you start.
Yeah.
And once you're in and, up to your elbows in the minutia of running a business, then you've got to deal with all of the other pieces with the clients and customer service. And, a lot of this is basic stuff that surprisingly, so many people who run businesses don't understand the mechanics of. You'd be shocked.
Well, I probably wouldn't be. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people have this perception that, the business folk or the people in the cannabis business from a business point of view, aren't as savvy or, don't have, as much experience. I mean, honestly, I find that's generally true of all early stage companies. I mean,
Agreed.
A lot of times, these are people's first time companies, maybe second time, but it's the learning that an early stage executive, even a founder, entrepreneur needs to go through is quite dramatic. And quite honestly, you make mistakes. The question is always how quickly can you learn from those mistakes?
Right. And pivot.
And pivot, exactly. And to take that knowledge and figure out how you're going to, make a better decision or learn from it and make the right move. I'm curious, looking at just kind of the general challenges of growing a business. I mean, you mentioned, cannabis has a couple of these, unique challenges, right? We've got, operates within a certain political environment with a certain legal environment, that both of those things seems to shift, as fair. Yeah, exactly. Any thoughts or strategies or ways that you kind of help companies navigate some of those things or suggestions about, how much to rely upon some of that stuff or, how to plan for alternative scenarios?
So a lot of this is flying by the seat of your pants because, like you said, things are changing as they change. For me, one of the biggest things that we look for when we're bringing on new clients, especially new clients who don't have the experience in running a business previously or anything like that, in the cannabis industry is how well are you able to handle change? Because if you cannot adapt, because it is a given in this industry that you are going to run into problems. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. We do direct mail marketing for clients. So email marketing, things like that. And we had MailChimp set up for some clients. And MailChimp decided, we don't like cannabis. We're going to just shut you down. And no explanation, just you're violating our terms of service, and that's it. And they just said, and no response. And so I said, okay, we're going to have to make a change. We're going to have to pivot, find a different. And it's the nature of, and as the laws change, and, again, depending on where you're operating, it's just, we have people on staff, so Bud Branding, we have people on staff whose job it is to keep track of these changes. That's what they do. I don't even get involved in that because it's literally too much. No, it's too much for me to keep track of. So, we get a new client, we bring in somebody new, we say, okay, let's talk about what it is that you need to do. What are you looking to accomplish? A lot of the branding questions that come along with their brand and their mark. And then we say, okay, where you are located, we're going to need to address this, and that. And then we'll move from there because it is so very specific to, which is one of the things that makes it such a nightmare, and it's constantly changing. So our first question is, how well do you handle change? Because if you say to me, I don't really like it, I'm not big on uncertainty. The first thing out of my mouth is going to be, you may not want to get into this industry, because you kind of have to have that steel stomach that just allows you to, because it is frustrating, it's stressful, there's money on the line. I mean, there's all of these problems that just are tied into doing this, and you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready for the pivot. You have to be ready to make the change. And the biggest problem with cannabis at the moment, which I am starting to see changing, but it's not going to be a quick change, is it's got an image problem. Right. So one of the things why branding is so important specifically in cannabis is because we need to change the dialogue. We need to change the conversation away from it just being, the random potheads, the drug dealers, the dread heads, the skaters. It needs to be more about the benefits, the qualities, why this is such an amazing product. But in order to do that, you have to change how it looks. So if you put out something that's just, it looks like it was done by someone in their basement, right? Yeah. You're not going to change that perception. I had a client who we were counseling, not about branding, a 3D client. And in the middle of a conversation about something, and we mentioned that, we had created this division and we were working now with, branding for cannabis clients. And she had this interesting reaction. She was like, well, yeah, I know it's becoming popular now, but I just don't know how I feel about it. And I said, okay, but why? Well, it's pot. And I'm like, okay, but there are a lot of really amazing, and this is, we're not talking about somebody who's uneducated. We're talking about people who are in the business world, who have this perception. The only way that you can change this is by creating things that don't give off the impression that you're just talking about somebody standing on a street corner smoking a joint. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong. So is it? You know what I'm saying? But
yeah, no. Is it education? I mean, do companies need to think about how they're going to sort of re-educate their market or re-educate the business? So how do you and what is the
process?
Yeah.
So I think a big part of what's going to push the legislative changes that we need to happen, because let's be honest, we need this to be federal. I mean, the state by state thing is insane. It's public perception. It's public demand. The public screaming to say, okay, we need this done. This needs to happen. But in order for that to happen, and like I said, it's starting to change, and there's much more a much more greater conversation around it now. But in order for that to happen, it needs to be seen as a viable industry. It needs to be like, the alcohol industry. It needs, you need to have that brand, that face that says we're legitimate, right? And that means that the products need to look legitimate. The companies need to function legitimately. They need to have, viable websites. And when you walk in the door, it needs to feel like a real store. It needs to not feel like some back, some place you go in and around the corner behind. I mean, it's not helping, It needs to be legit.
It seems, I think I guess the way that I've sort of seen the market, sort of the challenge from a branding point of view, the market is we have this on one side, this kind of, I'll call it the pot culture, the historical pot culture. And then we've got this very kind of medical side, right, which is sort of very scientific and very, kind of regulated and almost sterile, right? It's the, I'm going to go get a prescription. It's going to be some kind of, tincture or something. I'm going to, the way in which I engage it is going to be like I would take, amoxicillin or something. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
So, and I think the interesting space for me has been this kind of in between space where it's around wellness. It's not necessarily medical. It's a lifestyle wellness kind of recovery. A place where I'm thinking about health. I'm thinking about my body. I'm thinking about how I can use cannabis-based products to improve my lifestyle, sort of holistically. And And I think that's where it's nascent, but I see this huge kind of opportunity to kind of grow brands, grow products in this space. And yes, I think you're right. I think people still have this, oh, it's pot feel, but I'm sensing a general trend.
It's shifting.
Yeah. I think the older folks as well are starting to shift as well.
To your point, those two dynamics. So I'd say in general, the majority of the country, and we'll not get into Canada and all that stuff at the moment, but the majority of the U.S. Agrees with the concept of cannabis as a medical thing. They are not yet completely on board with it as a recreational thing. So that's where that sort of, that's where that brand, so a lot of the adjacent industries who are not necessarily doing medical stuff for the states that this is legal, who are doing things that are more recreational in nature, even if they're doing edibles and things of that nature, that's where the brand becomes so important because everybody's kind of like, okay, yeah, there's benefits medically. Okay, yeah, we get that, and for the most part, that stays sort of in that corner, and it's not questioned as much. Where it really becomes an issue is where the growth portion of this is really going to be taking off, and how companies and organizations are going to market this other section, this other segment of the cannabis industry with all of the various adjacent business models that are coming into play as a result of this being something that's legal. And so, I wrote a blog post called "Is Your Business Sus?" It's a slang term, sus meaning suspicious. And the irony is, in the regular marketplace, you don't want to be sus, but you really don't want to be sus in
hypersensitivity.
Yeah, exactly. You need, because the immediate reaction is, oh, well, are they really a company? Or are they just trying to, get money? And so it's so important. And I think to a certain degree, people don't really understand yet the larger, the big boys. Yeah, okay. But when you start getting into the sort of medium-sized businesses, the smaller businesses, where they're not really understanding how powerful that brand image can be, they're losing out. Because without defining your brand image and what the identity is of your business, you can't deal with your pricing. You can't deal with you haven't addressed your customer base. You haven't done the work that you need to do to be successful and dominant in your field. And that's where you're in business if you're not going to do that.
Well, and I think the whole idea of the being suspect, in some respects, it makes it very difficult. I also find, though, that if you get it right, because there's such a desire for quality, trusted brands, when you do get it right, it gives you a huge competitive advantage.
It gives you a huge edge. Yeah. Absolutely, it gives you a huge edge. But, again, this is something that needs to be built into your model when you're figuring out how to start a business in cannabis. In all of them, actually, but we're talking specifically cannabis. This needs to be a foundation of how you do things, because the branding is not just your logo, and it's the experience that your customer is going to have when they interact with you as a business, and that comes down to everything. Yes, what your logo looks like and what your website looks. Okay, fine, but it also comes down to how somebody picks up the phone when they call. If there's a website for them to track down a phone number, when they pick up the phone, what do they hear? When they walk into the store, what does it look like? How is the customer service? What is your brand promise? What are these people getting by dealing with you? And it's such an important aspect, especially in cannabis, because the element of sus is very prevalent.
Yeah.
So,
I guess.
You need that to be, because once this does sort of stabilize, then you're now going to be dealing with a marketplace that's even more competitive.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, so right now you're kind of in the forefront. You may not have as much competition, but once the legal aspect of this settles down and anybody can jump in, right? So you need to establish yourself now. You need to establish your brand, establish your place in your market now, because now is the time to do it. And to do that, you need to make sure your brand image and your identity is solid and without reproach.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what needs to happen. So that's how we consult our clients anyway.
So what are some of the questions that you ask your clients or work through with your clients that help them? I mean, so you mentioned the logo, website. I'm curious about like the brand promise. Like what are some of the more who you are questions that are important for people to kind of grapple with or to answer in order to effectively do the other stuff?
So the very first thing that you need to think about is who you want to be as a company. What is your story, right? Storytelling is very powerful. And in cannabis, almost everybody's got a story. Like you said, you do the interview, you want to use that. That's something that you want to start with. And from that story, the reasons that you've chosen to do this, you then want to build on who you want to get. Who is your target market? What kind of image are you putting forward? Are you going to be, a high-end brand? Are you going to be more like a craft beer type thing? Is it going to be more folksy? Is it going to be, there's a million directions for you where you can go. And those decisions will determine who you're targeting. It'll determine what your look is going to be, how you're going to market yourself, and where you're going to focus your energies. Those are the places that you want to start. And once you've answered those questions, and I'm not getting into the specifics of things like what does your logo need to look like? We have a slew of questions that what we call homework that we give to each client, where we make them answer a slew of questions so that they can start thinking about how they need to move forward. Because for us, there are a million directions to go for any given project. And the only way that we can effectively help our clients is by knowing what they want. And you'd be surprised how often they don't know what they want. Yeah. So a lot of what we do is handholding. A lot of what we do is coaching to try and say, okay, this is what you should be thinking about. Let's talk about these things and how you want to move forward and what you're looking to achieve. And then we can set goals and put things in place to help you get there. So a lot of what we do is it's not just marketing, but it's also business management to a certain degree, because in order for us to effectively do our jobs, we really need to be able to communicate. We need for our clients to be able to communicate effectively what that brand promise is going to be. What are they going to be giving their customers? What are they offering? Why should someone come to them as opposed to somebody else? Right. So that's a lot of what goes into how we help them to determine what direction that they're going to be going in. But it's a process. And like I said, you have to be in cannabis, just like in any other industry, you're going to have the people who don't think it's necessary. They're not going to be as successful because it is necessary. And either you find a way to make it part of your structure of how you do business, or you're going to find that you're going to get left behind because there's just no way of, the world is just super competitive now.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what I'm certainly seeing now, which is, companies that essentially haven't had competition. They've been in a situation either, logistically, operationally, legally, where they haven't had a lot of competition. They've been successful. So they kind of write off, well, we don't need to do these things.
Right.
The moment that you start getting competition and they start doing these things, you're going to see, that market share eroding or at least, companies' ability not to gain the new market share that's coming. In some respects, it's probably not even risking their current market, maybe not even risking a certain amount of growth. It's the significant amount of additional growth that they're not going to get.
Right. Exactly.
And they're going to find themselves still owning their kind of market, but someone else coming in and grabbing all of the new market that is coming into play.
Exactly.
And the other one I think is key. I think for me, you really kind of hit it, is at the end of the day, marketing, branding is a question of strategy and really defining what is your core customer, what is your core product, what is your core channel, like from a business point of view, what are you choosing and what are you not choosing? Like, what are you not? And sort of by defining those things, it makes it much easier to say, oh, okay, great. So we can definitively say we're not doing all these other things so that we can do this one thing really, really well and we can really position ourselves. Because I think that a lot of challenges I see when companies kind of launch and they really start to try to grow is that they're still chasing money and they're just going anything that's a dollar sign. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And we didn't get into the specifics of niche marketing and all of that, which is something also that needs to be considered. But focus is definitely a priority. It's definitely something that you need to think about. Because again, we're in a global world now. This is not, business is global.
Yeah.
It's easy to, we're setting up an office in Europe now because we're preparing for the onslaught of them catching up to us, which is unusual, but
yeah, exactly.
in this case, they're behind us.
Well, and I've talked to a few folks out of Canada, and the interesting thing there is because of the federal legislation they have in place, they can actually operate on an international level, and that they're looking at this as an international market. I mean, they're not thinking about it as a state or
Absolutely, it's an international market, and so but you have to operate it as such, and you need to think about it, because again, why does somebody choose you over somebody else? Yeah. What are you giving them that just making their value that much better? So yeah, I mean, it's personally, I love it. The excitement, the changes, the challenges. For me, it's No,
I get it. That's what makes it so fun.
Exactly.
So this is a great conversation, Monica. If people want to kind of contact you, find out more about what you do, talk more about branding and marketing and some of the challenges, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So they can reach me online. They can email me, monica@budbranding.net, or feel free to reach out via phone. Our offices are based in New York, so it's 212-491-7318. And I'm happy to talk with anybody. If you guys have questions and you're really looking to get started in this, we're happy to have a free consultation with you to kind of walk you through some of the steps you might need to be considering and the challenges that you're facing. But we're here. This is what we do.
Thank you so much. And I'll make sure for everyone in the show notes here that your URL, your email address, and I'll put that phone number on there as well. Yeah, highly encourage everyone to reach out to Monica. I think definitely she knows the world. She knows the this cannabis space, and I think branding and marketing are going to be key for any company that really wants to be successful.
Absolutely.
Monica, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Bruce.
You've been listening to Thinking Outside the Bud with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at thinkingoutsidethebud.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at thinkingoutsidethebud.com/newsletter.